All right, welcome everybody to another episode of The Partnership. I'm super excited because today I'm joined by my friend Alyshah, who is the Director of Partnerships at Vividly. And today we're going to talk about a novel concept that Alyshah actually developed mostly by himself, but in collaboration with our partnership leaders, which is the partner account based marketing. Before we dive into partner account based marketing, maybe we want to take a step back and go for the question of what is account-based marketing in general, and why do companies invest in it?
Yeah, great question. Account-based marketing, I think, is something that's grown a lot in the last couple of years. I think this day and age, when we think about AI, automation, and outbound, there's just a whole lot of volume. So the question is how do you do marketing that's different from direct marketing that can actually help you get a lot more efficiency by marketing directly to specific audiences, catering your messaging to be more personalized to those audiences. In this day and age, with all the data that exists out there and tools like demand-based or Sixth Sense, a lot of that's really possible. And so account-based marketing is really focused on being specific to certain audiences, using data to target those audiences with the right relevant messaging rather than just putting out a broad statement. So it's a pretty awesome strategy. It's actually one that, I think I've started to experience ever since I started my career and definitely grew a lot of my last role at Alice. And that's where, we were partnering with Sixth Sense at the time and really gained my chops around ABM and what that meant and how to be successful with it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Alice and what you did at Alice, and then also like maybe do you have a success story or anything you can share just about what
Yeah,
account-based marketing can do for you?
definitely. So at the time, what we were really focused on is we had a really lean marketing team. And I think this day, most people are going to have pretty lean marketing teams with not a large budget. And so
Yeah.
trying to figure out which audience is the most mature to target your messaging towards is focused on different parts of the funnel. And so if you think about it, people don't even know you exist. And so their level of journey and education is going to be completely different than people that know a ton about you. They've evaluated you a bunch of times in the past. Maybe they're even using a competitor. And so really what we focused on at the time is we had a direct mail product or a gifting product. And so our job was to help figure out which of these people had done gifting before and knew what that meant, knew what it meant to their business in terms of driving new revenue, and ones that had never done it before. This is a completely new strategy. Maybe they just done outbound and it only been emails and phone calls, and now they're trying to expand and try a new type of strategy. And so really ABM was designed to help us figure out which of these two types of brands were at different journeys of their evaluation and spend times on the ones that were closer down that bottom of the funnel, on the education scale to really get them over the line and start to evaluate us. And so that was kind of like the goal of it was ultimately to make sure that we could be efficient with our time and who we marketed to and the messaging that we had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you filter out like customers based on the stage of the funnel?
Yeah. And so there's tools out there like demand based and Success these days that are actually pretty insane with looking at that. So they collect a ton of data on all these different types of brands and companies. And what they'll do is they'll actually go through and they'll help sort based off of their intent signals. So whether somebody's Googled something and they're from a certain company, or whether they've looked at a G2 page, like they can gather all this data. And so I think now we all know, especially if you look at how we're marketed, as consumers, how much data exists on us and even stuff that's shown on your Instagram feed, for example. The same type of data is being collected on businesses and users of those business. And so really aggregating that data and coming up with a data model is what they do best. And those tools are designed to help you um, gather that data and then obviously run things like ads or marketing campaigns against those specific segments.
Got it. So it's it goes way more beyond like just a Facebook pixel. It's like really like taking the whole journey of a customer or of a company into account. So every single employee, like what they Google, which websites they look at, and so forth, and then catering your message. Like instead of broadcasting, you narrowcast your message
Ex-
directly to those people.
Exactly. And constantly, if you think about it, right? Like you might have a
Yeah.
cookie on somebody. Maybe it's a Marketo cookie or HubSpot cookie or something like that. But what if there was a company that could take and combine all the cookies across all these different segments and all these different websites and put them together to give you an aggregate as to what that person's doing on channels you can't even track them on? And so I don't know how they do it, but it's definitely sophisticated in terms of the data model, but it's pretty sick and it works really well. And definitely something that a lot of teams are investing in these days. But
Yeah.
the challenge with it is that it works quite well to a specific segment category, but it doesn't really take into account a deeper level. So you could say this is a marketing manager, and the whole goal of ABM is to be cross-functional between marketing and sales. And so let's say you get them, push them further down the journey, then you're going to have
Mhm.
sales understand exactly which value propositions they leaned in on because you're collecting
Yeah.
the data, and they'll actively target their messaging. But what gets missed in this is the further level of context. What technologies are they're using? What integrations do they have? Who are they talking to? And so, like, getting to that level deeper in terms of not just the persona and the value proposition, but to the actual technology and how your solution is relevant to that technology is really where I would say it goes from account based marketing to partner account based marketing, or Pah-BAM, as I like to call it, with a little bit of flair there. And that's kind of like, taking that other layer beneath it is when you have integrations, how do you now incorporate what was a sales and marketing program and incorporate the partner level of it from customer stories, messaging, data to take that to the next level and improve conversion rates.
Awesome. I mean, that's a great segue into Pah-BAM, partner account based marketing.
Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit more just about like, what that looks like in practice? Like when you are
Mhm.
bringing partners into this funnel, like, because you have the marketing team and you have the sales team who are already have like in lockstep on the strategy. Like, how do you
Yeah.
inject partners into the mix? And also how do you make sure that you don't step on any of those teams' feet?
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about baseline what you need to be successful with the strategy in the first place. You definitely need one of those ABM tools, and you need to be collecting some sort of partner data. So whether you're
Yeah.
using a tool like Crossbeam or Reveal to understand which customer segments are with your partner, you're going to need that as a baseline to start to do this type of strategy. The
Yeah.
struggle ends up becoming bandwidth. Do we have the time and energy to be able to invest and try something new? I've actually found that tends to be the first level objection, but once you start to try it out, it's pretty easy to overcome that objection. Essentially, what you're doing now is what would exist today is marketing would be running ads and campaigns against a certain segment. What you're asking them to do is get that segment and make it more specific. So now you're overlaying that partner data. So rather than just messaging, around a certain value prop of a marketer, for example, that's using a marketing automation platform, you can get specific and say it's a marketer that uses Marketo specifically, and let's target them with our Marketo customer story that we have, or HubSpot customer story. And so it's really taking it that one level deeper and being really specific with what you target them with. And the same is on the sales side. Rather than that sales team just following up with persona based messaging for a marketer, now you're getting them to incorporate things like, hey, I know that this is actually a Marketo customer and we're partners with Marketo. So let me use even more specific messaging, like the right customer story to get them. So what you're asking those teams to do is just um, use that data that you're providing them and get even one level deeper with their messaging, which often comes down to, hey, how do I access the data? Is that data convenient for me to access? And do I have time to do it? So that's really the basis
Yeah.
of creating a program like that.
And having all those assets ready, I assume, right? Because the customer stories you mentioned, like with Marketo and other integrations, like, I assume
Mhm.
unless you target only one partner, you will need a wide range of customer stories. Or would you recommend anybody who tries this technique to start with one partner, like say, like, hey, we double down only on Marketo. We have amazing customer stories. And so anybody who is a Marketo user is our ICP. Everybody who isn't might not be the right fit.
Exactly. So that's exactly what you do. You start out with the first partner, and it's pretty easy. I think as partner professionals, we do this quite often with just identifying our first integration, which is understanding, what do our customers use today in general, and
Yeah.
how are we better than our competitors with that specific type of technology or integration. And as we're talking about it, maybe this is more obvious already, but this is definitely more focused around technology types of partners than I would say agency types of partners because of just the nature of integrations and how important it is to be a compatible integration versus working with a specific agency, for example. So definitely a lot more focus on the technology side here.
Got it. So it's more focused on technology partner managers working with the marketing team and the sales team rather than a general program trying to get more agencies attached to deals.
Exactly. It's really about taking that integration and making it your key star. So if you have a really
Yeah.
strong integration today, you're better than your competitors on that integration, and you know that partner is willing to help you with that integration. Question is how do you develop more demand within that customer or that partner's integration base? Right. So let's say it's Marketo users, for example, or HubSpot users. How do I build more demand with more Marketo users? Because we know we can beat our competitors there. And that's really where marketing starts to get incorporated there. How do we cater our sales messaging? specifically to these users rather than just addressing them as their persona, addressing them with their persona and their level of technology. And so really getting deeper there to be more relevant and personalized is really the advantage of the program.
Got it. I think that
Mhm.
brings us to the next question I want to ask you. And also, if you're watching this live today, feel free to drop any questions in the chat for Alicia as well. How do you know that Pah-BAM is right for your team? Like, it seems like a very elaborate strategy. You need a lot of tools, you need a lot of data. Like, how do you know
Yeah.
that your team is ready for it?
That's a great question. I think today, if you're already running an integration program, I think that's step number one. Step number two is if you already have like tools like ABM or you're collecting data, I think that's step number two to make sure you have that baseline. And then the last piece ultimately is, I think those are definitely the prerequisites to this type of strategy. The last piece is ultimately trying to get that internal buy-in and focusing in on a specific type of integration or partner to get started with. And so it kind of goes back to your question earlier, which is like, where do you start? I think once you get that first integration or that first technology down, you can really focus in to make sure that, hey, let's see if we can market and run ads. Let's see if we can run ABM campaigns against a specific technology and highlight and use messaging that layer deeper beyond personas. Once you start to
Yeah.
do that, at least in my experience, what I found and what other folks that have tried this strategy have found as well is that look, you're going to start to see a higher conversion rate because it's so important if you think about it, right? In general, it's like it's not just important to me that you can help me as a marketer. It's also important that you can help me with the technology that I use. Because if it can't integrate well to my technology, then that's a bit of a roadblock to begin with. I think it was like um, tech, when you look at the data and you see which things are important in an evaluation, especially for a technical solution, integrations tends to be, in the top three list of things that need to be absolutely there in order for them to move forward with your solution. And so
Yeah.
really what you're doing is you're starting with that as a value proposition. And many folks have spent a lot of time in their evaluations trying to actually figure out whether that's going to work. So by starting with that value proposition and leaning in on it, you can actually drive a lot of conversions. So when I was at Alice, what we saw is like if you just marketed from the persona side and then you layered in the technology side, what you're going to get is like about a 37% increase in those target account conversions because you're really being hyper specific. You're telling them exactly how it's going to work with all the tools they have today, rather than making them do that leap on their own.
Yeah. And what are like some of the objections you hear when you implement this? Because I hear you talk and it sounds amazing. 37% increase, especially in target accounts, which are like tend to be like the larger accounts that your company really wants and which help you build credibility. Like I do hear though, like, the investment is probably pretty high, right? Like you have an MBM tool, you need
Yeah.
partner data from Crossbeam and so forth. You also need to probably like, you know, break into the mindset of your marketing and sales teams and say, like, hey, you can't just send the same cold outbound to every single customer. Like you should really like start tailoring it and making sure that integrations are the thing which are front of mind. Like how do you overcome those objections?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think ultimately starting with data can be a really good point. So if you look back and you just start to analyze your partner data against close rates, I think you can start to make a really strong business case just to begin there, saying, "Hey, look, when our brands evaluate us with this specific type of integration, our close rates tend to be much higher than when we don't have this integration in place." I think that's a big value proposition because you know that you're often winning deals with a specific type of technology. Your technology has been optimized for a specific type of integration, whether that was by
Yeah.
accident because the product team was doing it, or whether it was purposeful for the product team. Ultimately, that tends to be a baseline. So the question is then, well, how do we get more customers, and how do we target more customers specific to that type of integration? And that's where I think like a lot of it can be cross collaborative. Just putting that question out there of, hey, look, we know that our integration with Marketo is better than everybody else. How do we use ABM to get more of those users? First question is going to come back to you and say, well, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. It definitely makes sense. But how do we know who's a Marketo user? Right. And so
Yeah.
those questions naturally pose itself to, oh, well, we can actually integrate with their data. We can bring in the data that way. What if we got more specific? I think really being cross collaborative and posing the question of, look, we know our close rates are high with the specific integration or the specific type of ecosystem of technologies. How do we get more demand within that circle? Posing that question alone will start to get people to brainstorm and maybe even come to you with that idea.
Yeah. How do you know which integration to target? I think that's such an interesting one because you mentioned beforehand, like, hey, you should probably only take one. Like, if you want to take this, strategy and run with it, you should probably start with like, we only take Marketo and then, ignore all the other integrations, at least for this part of the strategy for now, and then
Yeah.
dive into those at a later stage. Like, how do you know which one to start with?
That's a great question. I'd say it comes down to like three things. The first one is like you're going to need the data. So if there's a partner that you think is really good, but you just can't get the data for, that can be a really tough one to start with because ultimately that's going to be a big roadblock in actually implementing the strategy. The second one would be it's got to be one that genuinely does have and does provide value and you can win deals against. So I'd say again, looking back at your closed won opportunities and overlaying your partner data against it to see which ones have a higher close rate from an integration standpoint is going to be a
Yeah.
great identifier of a couple ones on that list that could be good potential options. And the last one is going to be likely related to, I would say, what's easy for you to talk about and differentiate yourself and where a partner is going to get involved. If the partner is not going to be willing to help
Yeah.
you, it can be a roadblock. And some of the other ways to take advantage of this, which is really on the source pipeline side of things, which a lot of partner managers care about, which is understanding how data and intent can be overlaid against your partner information. So you can figure out which partners you should, which customers you should be asked to be preferred to with a specific partner. So having a partner be involved is essential. So I'd say like starting off with that list of like data is going to be a big one, which of those is available, which of those is actually happening in your deal cycles most common, and then which of those partners is actually willing to be involved and work with you and partner with you effectively is going to be really the three most important things to think about.
Got it. Yeah, I think those are great points. I think one thing which we observed at Hopin, which I thought was kind of interesting, is that early in our journey when we built out our app store, we wanted to
Mhm.
focus on one specific integration, and the one we identified in the beginning was the one which was the one most installed, right? So we had like thousands of
Yeah.
installs with an integration. We assumed like this is the one we should double down on. But
Yeah.
what we then actually realized later when we like dug deeper is that if we don't look at just installs, but actually like revenue tied to the integration, the picture completely shifted. Like there was a
Mhm.
very, very stark contrast compared to the integration, which had the most installs, but tended to be by like self-serve customers or free users
Yeah.
versus the integrations, which are more on the enterprise side, where one single integration was driving like, 20% of our revenue was attached to
Yeah.
that one single integration. So that kind of like helped us shift our mindset as well and like assume then like, hey, we should probably focus more on disintegration because if a customer has it installed, their retention rate increases significantly compared to a customer who is of a similar size but doesn't have the integration installed. So that's
Yeah.
a one pitch we used at the open side to get
Yeah.
people to pay more attention to integrations.
That's always interesting too, because like in my past roles, I always found there's like two data sets. Like, so one of them is integrations people want in order to move forward with the deal, and integrations people actually use after they move forward with the deal. And so you can find oftentimes people find a certain integration as they're really hung up on it, and they need that to actually move forward, but they don't actually use the integration because it's maybe too technically complex to integrate or it's too technically difficult. They don't have the internal bandwidth to actually use it. And so oftentimes it can also be different in terms of like which integration do you target? Is it the one that actually gets used and adopted the most? Or is it the one that's tied to the most won opportunities, even if it doesn't get adopted and used down the line? So it's important to look at your internal data and really understand what's going on there and make sure that you have that
Yeah.
cross collaboration.
Yeah. I mean, it's curious, right? Because like if an integration is part of a deal and people really want it and they make it a criteria to close a deal, but then they don't use it, are they going
Mhm.
to be retained, right? And that's a
Yeah.
it's a big question mark because if you just have an integration to tick off the check mark at the RFP and say like, yes, we integrate with, Eloqua by Oracle or something like that. Like that's
Yeah.
great. But then is it good enough that it actually like meets the requirements once you actually have to implement it? Because otherwise you just have a customer who joins for 1 year and then drops off.
And
And
insurance.
so
Exactly.
I've become more of a fan of like trying to like cover your bases, maybe with a tool like Zapier, just so you
Yeah.
have like base integrations with everything, great, but at least like you can, say that it's covered somehow, but then really
Yeah.
heavily invest in the integrations to actually move the needle and that your customers really rely on.
Yeah.
Because, if you have like a half baked integration with every single partner, it's not gonna get you very far. Like you said, like integrations are like one of the top three reasons why people buy your software.
Exactly.
And if every single integration is mediocre, that's not gonna get you anywhere.
Exactly. So it's not only important to look at the integration, it's also important to look at the depth of the integration, the retention rate against those integrations, because this is this is a long-term strategy that you want to cycle, right? As next year, you're going to be able to further target that customer, that partner's customer base, and you're going to be able to have more customer stories that are going to make that targeting even stronger. So you want it to cycle. You don't want it just to pick integrations that might be weak integrations that aren't adopted, aren't strong integrations, and then later don't get used because while it might create a little bit of momentum for your program, it's not going to be cyclical. It's not going to be good for the long term success, either for the company or for the strategy in itself.
Yeah. Yeah, the integration launch doesn't really drive a lot. Like, it's a cool thing to put on your, like, on your resume or something that you launched another integration, you put it on social media, etc. But like normally
Yes.
that doesn't lead to a lot of installs. What leads to a lot of
No.
installs is the actually attaching the integration to deals as they come in, right? Like the Pah-BAM,
Exactly.
like making sure that like,
Exactly.
hey, we have a Marketo integration, you flag that to every single one of your
Yeah.
customers. Like just announcing a Marketo integration is not going to drive a lot of installs because maybe customers already have, Marketo installed, or maybe they, aren't your customers yet because you didn't have a market integration until now.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's not a great way to drive leads to just announce the integrations. The way to do it is
Exactly.
probably to attach them throughout, the sales process over a long period of time.
Yeah. Which definitely gets to like the two other parts, right? Which is like the influence and source side.
Yeah. Cool. I wanted to like touch on this one as well, just because when we talk about account-based marketing, it sounds often like we just like target one customer at a time, which seems very inefficient. So how do you scale your partner program? Like how do you like scale Pah-BAM to a point where it's actually like a revenue engine for your company rather than just a way to win specific accounts that you can use for credibility?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was at Alice, essentially one of the strong things that we did was once we were able to start this and get really specific with the one certain partner integration, it brought to light two things. First thing is if we can make a deeper integration, we can improve that conversion rate even better. So what it starts to get is the product team involved and starting to do things like build stronger integrations with existing integration partners. Because like you mentioned, right? Maybe the strategy is working because you have a deep integration with a certain partner. And the only way to scale this and bring on the next partner is to build a deep integration there. And maybe that, surface level Zapier integration is not going to cut it. And so that's really a strong way of like, when you start to scale it, you're going to have that cross functional buy in, both from product and from other
Mhm.
teams as well, because you're going to want to put more emphasis on more integrations. The pro of this is that once you start to run this strategy, you're going to start to be able to see and track influence pipeline against, and I know influence pipeline is like the, uh, it's not the North Star metric. So we'll talk about source pipelines, but influence pipeline is one of those things to show that look, this is a cross-functional effort between sales, marketing, and partnerships. And without a deep integration and partnership with this specific type of technology, it wouldn't have been possible. You can look at the conversion rate comparison between when there is a strong integration, when there isn't. So then the question becomes, okay, we want to scale this. We know the conversion rate's better. We know marketing dollars are being invested here and sales dollars are being invested here, and they are being utilized better. So how do we do this with the next partner? And that's where, it really gets lots of people excited because they're like, okay, well, what's that next marketing automation integration that needs to be as deep as this in order to continue to keep that level of conversion rate? And so it really helps drive a lot of strategy from a product perspective and cross-functional. It truly is a lot more efficient. And so that's where like tracking influence pipeline is going to be really important for you. And we'll
Mhm.
often have other people asking, especially on the marketing side, as their need for more pipeline grows, they're going to probably come to you and say, well, this is really good. This is way better than the other buckets of partners that or other buckets of categories of folks that we're targeting. How do we get the next one? And so you can notice that other teams help drive that product strategy beyond you just pushing teams to do it.
Yeah. And is there a way to flip from influence to sourced? Like you mentioned, influence is often like the stepchild of the sourced revenue. Like it's not
Yeah.
as interesting to a lot of CEOs because they might assume that this company would have come through anyway somehow. Like,
Yeah.
is there a way to flip to them to the point where you're sourcing revenue with the partner as well?
Yeah, I think it's important. Influence is important. I know, like you mentioned, it's not as strong in terms of like that business case. But what you're trying to answer is like, hey, without strong product partnerships, this would have not been possible. And to get the next one, we need to have strong product partnerships. So there's a direct correlation, and it's a little bit stronger than other forms of influence, in my opinion. But the
Yeah.
source side of this is actually very important. When you start to have ABM, and I think this is a lot missed for a lot of folks, is you're gathering intent data, right? So you know who's at the bottom of the funnel, right? You know who's very well educated, who could be that next strong lead, And you have the folks that are not very educated, and the ones that are, they've never heard of the strategy before. That's where you can get really on the source types of activities. So suppose you have a bucket of, 100 customers at a partner. None of them know who you are because you're gathering that intent data. That's when you can run things like co-marketing webinars, for example, or activities with that partner to activate and build brand awareness with 100 customers of theirs that don't know who you are at all today. You can take more of those top of funnel activities. On the bottom of the funnel, one of the things I always loved is I could see intent scores. So I could see, like, if somebody had a really high intent, I could directly reach out to my partner and say, hey, look, you should refer them to us. I know all the websites they're looking at. I know exactly which value proposition. Let me write you a ghost message that you can send over because I know that that's going to hit, knowing exactly what they're doing from a research perspective on the industry. And so that's where you can get on the source side, is that you can really start to
Yeah.
send the right accounts to your partners that you want to referral to, not just because it's a target account, because you know exactly which value proposition they're leaning in on. And that's where it can have a really strong conversion rate. Because I find from a sourcing standpoint, it can be often hard to ask for referrals. And that normally fails in two ways. You ask them to give you a referral, and the brand comes back, or the customer comes back and says, no, I'm not interested. So you kind of lost a bit of my, like, oh, like, this guy's like making me,
Yeah.
ask for referrals, and it's not hitting with any of the customers that I manage as a CSM. So by giving them ones that are really strong from an intent perspective, they feel like, oh, wow, every customer I ask to talk to this partner wants to talk to this partner. So it makes me feel really good. I want to do this activity more. I think that's one way to really overcome that
Yeah.
referral portion that can be negative. Um, the other side of it as well is that, it's going to allow you to figure out exactly which partners you should be spending time with and which ones you should be asking referrals for, rather than as a partner manager yourself. Sometimes you have to do a lot of research to figure out which ones are good. You have to go to look at dead ops in Salesforce, all that stuff. And so it's going to make your life a lot more efficient as a partner manager as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that because, like, too often, like, you assume that the lazy path is the only path. So you assume that you just go to your partner and say, like, hey, are there any customers who might be interested in my solution? Here's a one
Yeah.
pager. You do all the, like, legwork in order to make it easy for them to refer, but you don't actually point out to the customer and say, like, this is the customer I want to refer them to, right?
Yes.
Or if you do, you might end up in a situation you describe, which is very awkward, because if the customer says they aren't interested, then the CSM just
Yeah.
put their neck on the line for something which didn't work out. So
Yeah.
using ABM or PABM data to, like, make it easier to understand, like, which customer is a high intent customer, and then ask
Mhm.
for the targeted referral
Yeah.
drives it works like magic almost. And it's also going to build that reputation with that CSM, because afterwards they might start referring people without you asking. And then that
Exactly.
CSM might, feel like this is one of the customers, like one of the partners which our customers really like, even if
Yeah.
there might be some misses as well.
Yeah. So, like, going back to objections, right? Like, one of the things that I often got was like, hey, we already knew they had high intent. But what if, there's a high chance that our AE or BDR could have reached out to them and booked the meeting? It's like, yes, but you can compare actually the two metrics. And it's important to do that as well, to think about that. The conversion rate in getting a meeting and driving that to a demo is likely going to be much higher when it comes from the referral from a partner, than when, if it's your team cold outbounding, even if the intent level is the same, it's high for both of those. And so
Yeah.
one of the pros of this is, like, if they refer you somebody and it goes really well, they're going to be more likely to refer you somebody down the line that might not have as high of intent. And so it helps
Yeah.
drive more cycles of that partner being more involved with you, and spending more time with you as a partner versus your AE. Once they book that meeting, there's no cycle there, right? They just have to go find the next high intent account. They're doing nothing to educate that top of funnel where there isn't much interest or understanding of your solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. One question. I know we're coming up on time, but one question I really wanted to ask you is just, what does your day to day look like when you're implementing PABM? Because, we discussed this beforehand already, but, like, for every kind of partnerships program versus, like, a channel program or a technology program or, affiliate program, like, there's a different kind of day to day to it. So what are the
Yeah.
tasks that a partner manager normally does on a daily basis when they are implementing this program?
Yeah, I'd say one of the things that you need to change is probably spending a lot more time with sales and marketing in the same room, especially if you have an ABM program going on today. Oftentimes, as a partner manager, you might be meeting with marketing separately to do partner marketing, might be meeting with sales separately to do co-selling, but they likely have a meeting where they're working together to do ABM. You need to be part of that meeting. That's one thing that's going to change, is that you need to be involved to help drive the strategy, because you have a lot of the data, and a lot of that messaging is going to change it as well. So I'd say that's one thing that's going to change a little bit in your day to day. The other thing that's going to
Yeah.
change is your own desire and need to look at data is going to change quite a bit. So oftentimes what I would have to do is like I'd put every 2 days I'd be looking in Salesforce at intent scores against my partners, and figuring out which of those are really close so that I can send it over to my partner manager to see if I can get that referral. And managing that boundary between sales, reaching out directly and you asking for a referral is really sensitive. So that's also going to change a little bit. Is you're going to have to manage that relationship and that boundary a little bit more internally when you start to execute a strategy like this. So that's super important. I'd say one of the last things as well is like you need to get ahead of the, oh, this is working well now. What's the next partner that we need? Because the last thing you want is your strategy to start to scale and then realize, oh, a product integration is going to take 6 months. And I didn't start building a business case early enough. So again, partnerships is hard. It's so cross functional. And I know that's tough for people to like balance the short term, and revenue is really important today, but also balancing that long term and making sure that next partner is ready to go for a strategy like this is also going to be really key to making sure that you can keep the momentum of the scale going.
Yeah, it's all about momentum, and I think you're dead on, but because partnerships, like you said, like integrations take like 6 months or something like that to build. If you're
Yeah.
lucky, like if you get the resources committed immediately, but that can leave a very long gap where you can lose all your
Yeah.
momentum and it fizzles out. And then even then, once it's built, like you kind of already have to have the next one in your mind. Otherwise, you
Yeah.
can't build stack your integrations and motions on top of each other.
Absolutely.
I know we're over time, but I wanted to get one question from the audience in before we leave. And that one is, how do you convince partners to share their accounts info with you? How do you get the PABM data to engineer the magic? And I think that's a good question because we talked a little bit that there are ABM tools and Crossbeam and stuff, but how do you get
Mhm.
somebody like a HubSpot or a Marketo or Salesforce to actually engage with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's two ways you can go about gathering the data. I think one is if you can get it directly from the partner, that's ideal. Convincing them to share account information with you can really depend on the partner themselves and their comfortability. There's definitely the situations where like a HubSpot's probably not going to give you their customer data, right? They're a public company. That's hard to get that information. Similar with Marketo, that can be very difficult. So you can do things like you can run the same strategy, but get, you know, that data from purchasing that data. There's definitely a lot of online scrapers these days that go through and look at all the cookies on websites to give you that information. And then using that to pipe that into your ABM campaign can again be a strong way. The challenge today with ABM campaigns mostly across the board is that they're not taking technology and technology usage as a filter. Some ABM tools actually now even allow you to do it. So they actually will do the scraping for you. I think Sixth Sense is one of
Yeah.
those ones where you can actually put in and filter by technology specifically, but folks aren't using that as a strategy. So I think like there's different ways to go about the data. Ideal is definitely getting it from the partner. If that's not possible, then either getting the data yourself or using one of these intent tools and have that provide the data to you.
Awesome. Um, and then I hope that answered your question, dear audience member. And then last question before we leave is one piece of advice for the audience. Like if we take away one piece of advice from this talk today, what would that be?
Yeah, oh man, I'm gonna have to be that person that says, you know, AI on this call, but or on this LinkedIn live. But
It has to
honestly,
come
like
up at some
today,
point.
it had to come up. You know, like honestly, AI automation and outbound is become so insane these days that, in my opinion, you know, it means there's going to be a stronger emphasis on personalization to differentiate yourself. And so, by
Yeah.
really leaning into partnerships and building something that's, you know, account based but with partners can be an immensely strong way to cut away from what's probably going to be a huge volume of semi personalized or personalized enough that it tricks you type of messaging that's going to occur over the next couple of years, and instead leaning in on those referrals. So, like I said, right, if you have that intent score, why not have the partner refer rather than have your AE reach out? It's going to create a cycle of them wanting to constantly participate with you. And so I think that's a strong way to cut through that, what will be potentially a lot of noise in the next couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. If you put it in that light, it's going to be more important than ever, given that there will be so much spam and artificial noise, as you said, coming in the
Yeah.
next years. And even
Yeah.
your AE's outreach will be harder because who knows whether they're a real person reaching out or a bot reaching out. So
Exactly.
trust in your partners and trust in tools that customers already have is going to be
Yeah.
crucial in order to like start the
Definitely.
process. That's awesome. Thanks so much, Alyshah, for coming on today. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching this show. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the partnership live on LinkedIn.